Listen, you may want to write for kids, but not every story idea that you have fits that picture book format. And knowing the difference can save you days and months of frustration. Today, I'm going to walk you through the 5 questions that you need to ask yourself as you're getting ready to start your journey of writing a book. Because while in your mind, you may think that this story idea you have is going to be perfect for a picture book, in execution though, it may not really fit into those parameters. So it's important for you to know the distinction there, so that way you can fix it now, early in the writing process, instead of fixing it at the very end, like I did. I'm going to give you 5 questions, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time in between each question for you to write down yes or no and any extra thoughts that you have before we fully unpack each one of these questions. Question number 1, can your idea be told in under 500 words? Does your story center on one emotional theme or one big problem? Can the story be told visually? Is your story idea appropriate for children, ages 0 to 8, or, to make it easier, pre-K through 3rd grade? Does your story have a satisfying end? I hope you wrote down your yeses and nos when it came to those questions. I'm gonna take some time to unpack those questions so you can understand it a little bit more, so feel free to add some more notes. And if your yes turns into a no or your no turns into a yes, that's completely fine. So going back to question number 1, can your story be told in under 500 words? Now, depending on where you are in the writing process of your book, this is kind of like a hard one to know. Like, how do you know the word count automatically in your head? Or if you've already started writing it, you may know, but more often than not, we're often in the idea phase, so we may not actually have a running word count processor in our head like Microsoft Word does. But it's important for us to still think about how many pages, how many words do we need to tell our story? Because with picture books, the usual range, picture books are 32 pages. It's about 400 to 600 words usually for a picture book. I've seen shorter and I've seen longer. But overall, given the page count that you have of 32 pages on average, there's not a lot of room for you to explain everything. A good rule of thumb that I always tell the authors that I'm coaching is that picture books don't tell everything, but they tell enough, right? You may not be able to say A through Z of all the ideas you have about your main character, but in a picture book, you can get through A through B, maybe A through D. Not the full, but you're giving a good snippet into who the character is, enough for the reader to understand and follow them along their journey. And so a good way for you to think about this, if you don't have an internal word processing unit in your head about how many words your story would take, I want you to think about, can I tell my story without having long explanations, without having huge backstory flashback moments, without having a lot of extra scenes to make sure that my story makes sense to the reader? This is easier said than done, but something that needs to happen over the process of you thinking about writing your picture book, or as you're writing it, if you are going this path, because you don't have enough space to do everything. And so think about how you can do that in a way that is going to be engaging and impactful with a few words versus having paragraphs to tell your story. Does your story center on one emotional theme or problem? This is important because, going back to my earlier point, a picture book is only 32 pages. You have to be very short, concise, and to the point when you're telling a story in picture book format, which means you need to focus on one lesson, one problem, one transformation that is occurring within your character. And I dive into this a lot more in my video about how to make a good main character for your picture book, so feel free to check that out for yourself if you're at that point or you're figuring that process out. But overall, the overall story needs to have one big focal point. We are going on a journey to do blank. And once we do blank, the result will be blank. It needs to be that simple. Not because kids are dumb, but you don't have enough word count to be extravagant and have plot A and plot B. You say you want to have multiple storylines or multiple character arcs. That's gonna be a little bit hard to do in a picture book. Not impossible, because I've seen it done before, but it's all in the stylistic choices that you make to make that possible. Like, I'm trying to think, do I have that book on my bookshelf? One second. All right, so I had this book on my bookshelf that I immediately thought of while I was doing this, so thank God I buy books. Maddie's Fridge, if you've never read it before, it's written by Lois Brandt. Cool. It's like brand with a T at the end. It's written by Lawrence Brandt and it's illustrated by Vin Vogel. Basically going back to that point about how your story needs to center around one emotional theme. And sometimes with picture books, it's hard when you have like multiple characters or like not multiple characters, my bad. More so multiple storylines going on and multiple A plot lines and B plot lines going on. I think Maddie's Fridge is a good example of how you can have two plot lines going on in a book, but it's still centering around one emotional theme. So for example, this is about Maddie and her friend Sophia, and it's about food insecurity. And so Maddie has a lot of food in her fridge, whereas Sophia doesn't. And in the book, you get to see Sophia's life when she's at home, and you get to see Maddie's life when she's at home. And the difference is there when it comes to like mealtime and different things, when they bring their lunches to school, you get to see that difference there. So on the surface, it seems like there's an A plot and a B plot going on. But overall, it's about the same theme of food insecurity. That's the overall focus point of the story. And Maddie is more of the main character than Sophia. So you're still following Maddie more so than Sophia. Sophia is there as a contrasting character. But this is a good example of, yes, your book still needs to have one central theme, food insecurity. But you can navigate having two different plot lines, storylines, but being tactful with it. But overall, as you're thinking about the book that you want to write, it's important to keep this in mind. Your story is about blank. Period. Maddie's Fridge is about food insecurity. And the more you add to that, it can get a little complicated for kids to follow along. So being mindful of your story that you want to write, are you focusing in on one problem, one emotional beat that your story can be centered around, so that way kids can understand it clearly the first time they read it? So keep that in mind. Picture books are about zooming in, whereas chapter books allow you to zoom out. So I would imagine like if this was adapted into being a chapter book, there would be a lot more deeper reflection on Sophia's side of things and Maddie's side of things, to really flesh those things out. Versus, like I said, you only have a few pages to get that story across. So you don't have space to really flesh out those various storylines, different story arcs, and points there. So just keep that in mind. Question number 3 was, can your story be told visually? Now, this could be the same thing as when it comes to the workout of like, how do I know if my story can be told visually? But this is important to keep in mind if you're considering the picture book format, because a picture book has pictures. The illustrations and the words are going to be companion with each other in the story. They work together to tell the overall story. And so as you're thinking about the story that you have and thinking about the limited word count, you have to put trust in the illustrator, because what you can't say with your limited words, the illustrations have to say for you, right? Like I said, pictures and words are working together to tell the story. And so to work together, that means the words can't repeat what the picture is saying 100% of the time. Sometimes the words are only describing 25% and the picture is doing the rest of that heavy lifting. Or it's vice versa, where the picture is doing a little bit of the work, but the words are really carrying it. A good way to know if your book cannot be told visually is if you have a lot of narration or internal monologue or dialogue that you have for your character. I'm not saying you can't do that in your book of having internal reflections or different things like that. But again, just thinking about how hard it would be to show that with illustrations. It's not impossible. You can show your character thinking about something. You can show your character journaling or reflecting. But if that's gonna be a big driving force in your book, I don't think it's gonna work really well with a picture book format, because it has to work together. So you have to be able to have things that an illustrator can showcase in a way that people can understand. When it comes to a picture book, we don't just read the story, we see it unfold. You have to balance that. And balancing that requires a collaboration with an illustrator, so that way it makes sense. So a good example of this is with this book, Knock Knock, by Daniel Beatty, and it's illustrated by Bryan Collier. If you're a returner to my channel, you know that I love Bryan Collier's illustration styles so much. I talk about it in a video on my page already. So if you look at this illustration style and you're like, wow, this looks really familiar, I definitely have a type, and it's Bryan Collier's illustration style. But something that I really love that they do when they work together when it comes to Brian Collier's illustrations and Daniel Beattie's words. They showcase really well internal thoughts like we're talking about through the illustration. So if you haven't read Knock Knock before, it's basically a poem, a spoken word poem by Daniel Beattie talking about having an absentee parent. And so it's a really great lesson for kids about how do they keep living their lives when a parent has, left for whatever reason that it may be. And one of the pages that they have, the page reads, "As you grow older, shave in one direction with strong, deliberate strokes to avoid irritation." This is just one of the points that he's making in the poem about, Dad, I miss you, and you're not gonna be here to see me grow up. Dad, I miss you, and who's gonna teach me these manly things? And his dad's response to him is, the advice of, okay, this is how you shave if you need to shave. The words, though, are just giving those instructions about how to shave. But the illustrations, which I love, love, love dearly, as you can see, you have a little boy who grows into he goes from like a child to probably a middle schooler to a high schooler, right? Of him learning and navigating that, of shaving. I think actually looking at it closer, he's actually tying a tie. But the illustrations do that point of showcasing how he is growing up alone and figuring it out alone. Even though the words are the words of his father talking to him, the illustrations show him growing up by himself and figuring it out. And so that's what we mean about your story has to work with the illustrations. We are saying one thing, we're saying the father's advice, but we're watching the son grow up by himself and figure it out on his own. Oh, love Knock Knock. It's a really good book. But that's what I want you to keep in mind. Can your story be told visually? How can your words and the illustrations work together to convey the overall message that you're trying to push off in your story? Question number 4, is your idea age appropriate for youth ages 0 to 8, or to make it easier for yourself, pre-K to 3rd grade? Now this one should be a given, right, when you're writing a picture book, but just for clarity's sake, you have to just keep in mind that these books are written for kids, but not every story about children is for children. So just thinking about, are you talking about things that, yes, a kid may be learning about something new through your book, so they don't need to be an expert in everything that you're talking about. You can talk about adult concepts, not in terms of crazy adult concepts, but using those 13-letter words, but just explaining it in a way that a pre-K to a 3rd grader can really understand. But just be mindful of the vocabulary that you're using and that you're following like typical formatting when it comes to writing a book, of having a clear beginning, middle, and end, right? Kids are learning that structure in school, so it's good for them to know, first, this happened, but then that happened, and then this happened as a result. They're used to that beginning, middle, and end. So just keeping that in mind that, like I said, just because the story is about kids doesn't mean it's for kids. So be mindful of what you're actually writing about. Our last question number 5, does your story have a satisfying end? Now notice how I didn't say happy ending, right? Even though that is preferable for kids' books that we have a happy ending, you need to have a satisfying end. Like I said, preference towards happy, but overall, whatever emotional problem or emotional theme that you're focusing on, like we talked about with question 2, we need to have that resolved. However that looks, right? Like, what does resolution look like? So for example, going back to Knock Knock, it is about a kid whose father isn't in his life, and so he's learning how to grow up and live on his own. This is what I mean by having a satisfying ending, not so much of a happy ending. Spoiler alerts for a book that was written, when was this book written? Hold on. When was this book written? Hold on. That's not right. Was it 2013? Okay, this book was written in 2013. Where was I going with that? Spoiler alert for a book that was written in 2013, but in the end, like I said, it's about an absentee father. His dad doesn't show up at the end of the book to be like, and surprise, son, I'm here. No, it's about having an absentee father, and like at the end, his dad is still absent, right? He's just learning to live without him. And that's the satisfying part, right? That's the satisfying part that may not be quote unquote happy. It's satisfying because he's learning how to exist without his dad being there, but it's not 100% happy from a kid's perspective because they'll be like, well, where's his dad? So just being mindful of that, of having a satisfying, end, whatever problem that you introduce at the beginning, you're providing a solution or a resolution or an understanding, at least at the end of the book for kids, because that's what they want to see. And that will make them, again, want to reread it over and over and over again. So if you answered yes to 4 or more of those questions, then your idea is a very strong contender to be a picture book. If you had more no's than you did yes for those 5 questions, but you still want your idea to be a picture book, don't worry, I was in your same position. When I was writing my very first picture book, Precious Love, I had every intentions, and I have the rough drafts to prove this, that I was gonna make that book a chapter book. But as I was writing it, something just, it was going well, but something internally just said like it wasn't really hitting on what I wanted it to hit on. It just didn't feel right as I was writing it. And I started researching. And when I started really understanding picture books and understanding that you can tell complex stories within a picture book, I realized that my story will be benefited from question number 3 about could it be told visually? Because there was a lot of things that I didn't know how to say as I was writing my book, but I figured what I couldn't say, my illustrator could show. And I'm really grateful for that process and how that changed my mindset about what a picture book could really do, as well as just expanding me in terms of collaboration, rewriting, and all those good things. So if you answered more no and you still wanted your book to be a picture book, you definitely can rework it. Just continue to think about ways that you can rewrite, reshape your story to really fit the, not restrictions, fit the confines, fit the parameter of what makes a book a good picture book. And this is not easy, but it's definitely worth it. Now, if you're already in the early drafting of writing your book, I encourage you to check out this video on my page about how to edit like a pro using the Hemingway app. It's a very great tool that'll help you make sure that you're writing your book for the picture book format level or for a chapter book level as well. It's a really great tool that I walk you through every step of the way of using it. And most importantly, it's free. So I'll see you in that video.